they would just plant you out of court. So I think we need to have a stronger understanding of what's going on.
Any other question? David?
Thank you, Gordon, for excellent talk and some really hard work. What I take from it is that if you were to just really look at each individual contractor area and only do the work within even 175,000 kilometre square, you're going to end up, or you're not going to be able to make a convincing case that the impacts will not affect rare species and lead to extinction. But by combining information over a bigger area, so having to combine different contractors' data, it may aid everyone by actually showing that in fact fewer species are rare, and therefore there will be less impact, and therefore mining can proceed at a greater rate, if you like. So there is an advantage in combining data for all contractors rather than just looking at individual areas. Would you agree with that?
Well, I couldn't put it better myself. I think that's a mastery summary of the advantages of doing this. If we add these areas together, we will have a much better understanding of the distribution of organisms, and we will have a much better understanding of the risk of impact. I think that's why we need to do that.
Stefan?
Following on that question, would that mean that we only need one baseline study for the entire CCFZ?
I don't see how you could do that, to be honest, in terms of one study. You need to start with one study. But I think that would then indicate where you would go. I think you would need to, to be honest, we need to start with a baseline study. We don't have one. We have lots of different studies that were done in different times, but we have nothing that covers the CCF. We have no data to actually establish that yet. So my answer to that is I don't know, to be honest, but I think you would need to start, and we haven't done that yet.
David?
I suppose I haven't got a feel for scale. I was wondering how many species have actually been described already, or maybe how many species have actually been described in the literature. Did you cover that at all?
I could probably count the numbers of taxonomic papers that officially describe new species from the CCFZ with the fingers of two hands. In 40 years of study, we have basically got less than 10 for macrofauna. And in some groups, we haven't got any at all. And that's, I think, pretty bad indictment of the situation. And the issue is often that the money goes to the ecological studies, so we end up putting money into getting a research vessel there to analyse the samples, and then when we have to do the long-term taxonomic work, there's no money left over, so it gets left to the good nature of the taxonomists, and of course it doesn't get done because, like everybody else, we're looking for the next grant that we have to support our work. So some of these collections have been sitting in places like the Los Angeles County Museum from the Dome study, which was done back in the 1980s, and hasn't been looked at since.
So I suppose one thing that might be slightly daunting then, if only such a small proportion has actually been described, and therefore the problem is quite large, is that there would be worry that this is going to be a large cost. And so is there a way of looking to making sure that the costs are still within a reasonable amount for contractors, because there are other ways of actually funding taxonomic work, or have we got what's the scale of the problem financially, I suppose?
Well, in terms of, it depends how you want to look at it. In terms of the potential benefits that people are going to get by mining the ocean, the cost of the taxonomy is peanuts. I mean, it relatively is. It's the cost of a couple of people with a microscope, even a PhD. But it's, we're talking about an average grant, I guess. I wouldn't like to put a figure on it because there's different figures in different countries. But I want to try and put this into perspective and not frighten people off. There are a lot of species out there, but a lot of those species are very common across the whole of the CCSA, and different groups have different numbers of species associated with them. This isn't an intractable problem. It is just a question of providing some resource to enable people to get on and do the work. So it is a doable thing within a reasonable time span. It is going to take some resource to do that, because, as I pointed out a minute ago, taxonomists don't work for free. We have to support ourselves in our organisations just as any other scientist does. And if we're going to be asked to do this kind of work, then somebody's going to have to come up with some funding to help support us. Now that can be, we can help in ways like we can help train people, we can bring together collaborative projects, we can apply for grants together with people, we can apply to various organisations to try and make this happen. But we're not going to be able to do it just off our own backs. It doesn't work like that anymore. The world doesn't work like that anymore. So if we're going to solve this problem, collectively, we have to think of a way of doing this. Funding it and then producing the data. And it is a doable thing. We're not talking about so many species it's overwhelming. We're talking about, in the macrofauna, potentially in the hundreds for things like polychaetes. But that is doable these days. We just have to set up the pipelines to do it. That means we need to put a little bit of resource behind it. What's a little bit of resource? Well, that depends on what level we want out of this. And my attitude to this is hardened over the years, that we need to be able to put up some reasonable amount of money to support, say, PhDs or postdocs, whose only job is to do this. And you would then be able to get through an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of taxonomy, and get it published and get it out there. But at the moment, we never put that kind of resource into it. We don't put the effort into this. And that's why for 40 years we have done nothing. It's time we started to think collectively about how we can pull this together and actually produce what we need to be assured of the impact of the mining. Because when people start asking us what impact the mining is going to have, they're not going to care about the economic costs. They're going to care about how many species are going to be made extinct. If we can say they aren't going to be made extinct, and we can be sure about that, then isn't that money well spent?
Yes.
I just wanted to make another note in terms of, from a mining perspective, the impact assessment and the taxonomic identification of new species is reasonably well understood as a process as part of a traditional EIA, and from again a terrestrial perspective, when we scope and budget for EIAs, or impact assessments, we scope and budget for allowing for the description of new species. And if we identify a whole bunch of new species, there are managers further up who get nervous, but nevertheless we still have to identify them, and that's a process and a cost that we bear as a mining company. I think that's reasonably well understood. The value in this environment, or in this room, is to collaborate and to make that information available for the other contractors to use as well. So from a cost perspective, as an environmental manager in a mining company, I would absolutely expect to have to bear the cost of having those new species identified if we find them. the return, I guess, is to be able to collaborate with the other contractors so that we can use that larger geographic scale to our own benefit as well.
I mean, that's great to hear, but it hasn't happened yet.
Sure.
Yes. You know.
Gordon, I have more detailed question. You said for describing the rare species and endemic species, we need to take more samples. And
Sorry, go on.
my question is, and I suppose many contractors would like to see the answer. For example, how many exactly samples we need to take, for example, on 1,000 square kilometers to describe this species?
I would like to just detail that. I didn't actually say that you had to take more samples. I meant that we had to add samples that were already being taken together. One way of, there is a limit to, well, there is a minimum number of samples that needs to be taken in an area. And Glenelg is actually going to deal with that, not me. But from my perspective, I would like to be able to add the data from lots of areas together to look at this problem, not just add more samples from an area. So I think there's a win that we can get without adding extra burden to the contractors. So long as the minimum number of samples is being taken, adding those samples from one contractor to another contractor to another contractor will give me the kinds of information I need to look at rare species.
But before each contractor will take samples, he needs to know how many samples at least he should take on his area, investigated area.
That's a difficult one for me to answer because I haven't looked at that, but I'm going to rely on my colleague from IFRM now to deal with that.
Yeah, it's part of my talk. Depends on the question you ask. If you want to get a comprehensive list of species, by separation from the biotech chemicals, will give you, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 box scores. If you want to try to make differences between densities of two species in an area that is being impacted and an area of reference, depending on the mean density of the species, it can go up to 100 or 1,000 box scores per station. So that's kind of an issue that we have to deal with. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other question? Yes, David.
Sorry to hog the floor, but your new data that I was really interested in is that the rare species, although there are many, only in any one area or one sample account for about 6% of the individuals. So in terms of their importance in turning over organic matter and their importance in how fast things are working within the seabed is really quite small. And this is what we call ecosystem functioning, as opposed to just diversity. So what's really important in terms of how fast things happen and how healthy the deep sea is really depends more on those smaller number but abundant species that make up your 31%. And in the advice to contractors, we say that not only should you measure species diversity, but you also should be measuring rates of bioturbation, how quickly the sediment is being mixed, of which there's a standard technique, which is it shows how fast things are working. So if if it's only dependent on these really more abundant species, can we make a case, do you think, in the longer term, that the extinction of rare species isn't necessarily going to be important? How, is there a case, or how?
Well, if you look at tropical rainforest, which is a similar environment in terms of high species diversity, many of those species are rare. They've only found 1 or 2 individuals. The information that we have from studies that have been done and comparisons between impacted forest sites and non-impacted forest sites suggests that what happens often is that the species that were rare in one area, say the non-impacted area, suddenly become dominant in the impacted area because the dominant ones have been taken out. So you get a major shift. The other thing about ecosystem functioning, it's not just about bioturbation, it's about how carbon disappears through the system and is worked out. And one of the things that studies, again, in terrestrial and shallow water environments have shown that rare species often contribute to the overall complexity of the system. So effectively, they give you resilience because they are the redundancy in the system. You have all of these species, and basically they seem to be doing the same thing, but they're not quite. And they're giving that buffer for change. And they maintain the ecosystem functioning because of that. So effectively, if you like, they're the reserves for the way the ecosystem functions. When you take them out, you don't have that reserve anymore. So the resilience tends to drop. So you have to be very careful about apportioning functionality to rarity. Because they're rare doesn't mean to say they're not important. But to go back to your other point, and a quick win I think that we could get, is that you have all these dominant species, these are the ones that have most of the biomass in terms of that. If we could just do the taxonomy of those to begin with, that would be a major step forward. And it wouldn't be that difficult to do.
Okay, so is that how you come to a figure of 100 species? You said something about if you were going to do new work, then you're really talking about getting the taxonomy sorted out of about 100 species.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that many, to be honest. I mean, it might be 100. We'd certainly, you've got to be careful, I'm talking polychaetes here.
Yeah.
We go into the isopods and we go into the amphipods, we've got another order of magnitude, but potentially, I don't think the taxonomic problem is probably not as high as we tend to think. And I think having molecular tools will help. And Elena and many of the other experts will be explaining how to use molecular tools. And I think that having those combinations will give us a quicker way to describe things and get them published than we've had in the past. We just have to get our mind around it. It's not difficult to do, it's just we need some funding to do it, we need some ideas to do it, and we need experts and time to do that as well.
Thank you very much. There's a question here. Yes, sorry.
The sharing the data, we debated last time we had the meeting at the ISA. And still I'm concerning about some of the contractors has the long-term environmental database compared to the others, newcomers contractors. They don't have none. And if we're sharing the data, it's unfair. That's what I mean. It's making the environmental management is good for the sharing the data. But already some of investors invested money for the collected data. And suddenly, if open the sharing the data, I don't think that's a good idea for doing somebody already done a lot of work on it. And if that is not resolving the first, I don't think go forward that quickly as making the sharing the data, we better manage all the CCFD job. And that's maybe the Mr. Odenton should care how we doing the process, either sharing the all data with the all contractors. And That's one of my priority for the some of the investors or contractors done a lot of work for more than 10 years. But newcomers just to taking the data to sharing, I don't think that's really fair enough.
May I say something? The ultimate objective is to get us to mine, yeah?
Yes.
We are identifying gaps with this data in relation to our ability to go forward with mining by whomever chooses to mine. I am a little bit perplexed because basically what I've heard Gordon present is something that takes a look at the whole region, yeah? He's talked about rarity of species, endemism, etc., etc. What are we keeping the data for? I've collected a lot, you haven't collected so much. Whatever it is, we're trying to see what happens when we are able to pool that data to enable us to make some decisions in relation to the impact on the fauna. I appreciate what you said, but if with the lot that you have, we're still not in a position to answer a number of these questions, are you going to be able to go forward in mind? You follow what I'm saying? I mean, granted, the ISA should think about it, but I also think it's also for the contractors to think about it. Years ago at an ISA meeting, and I believe it wasn't even just a workshop, there was a decision taken that environmental data was not considered confidential data. I'm trying to figure out how one profits by saying I have a lot, you just started out. And I don't know whether the question is, should I share mine? My answer to this, should I share mine, is if by being able to pool these data together, we're in a better position to talk about the impact and have a better picture of what we're talking about. I think it works for everybody. It's not, I don't think 75,000 kilometers is about to, I don't think that amount of space is about to answer all the questions that we have. And to the extent that we can't answer these questions, I sit at the Seabed Authority and we do get questions coming out of various environmental groups who express deep concern about whatever mining is supposed to do to the area, for example, in the CCZ. Most people's questions are in relation to polymetallic nodules. They're not in relation to sulfides or crust at this material moment. So in a sense, I throw it back